Hello everyone. I'm going to give a short introduction to a longer piece of work. I've had to cut a huge amount out to fit this into 10 minutes, and if you want to know more, the whole presentation is available on the Moodle website. However, I feel I can't fail but to acknowledge the work of both my collaborators, Holly and Hilary and Mark, and our funders, the Ogden Trust and Esteem. So what's this about? Well, basically, some groups of students do better than others. I'm focusing on physics. I'm focusing on the Open University in the UK. And I'm initially focusing on the difference between male students and female students, where, of course, gender isn't actually a binary division. What we're really trying to do is just get under the skin of what's going on so that we can improve the experience for everybody. Concentrating then on the gender gap, and indeed I'm actually concentrating on one particular module. It's a module with the code S217, its predecessor was S207, and it's our Physics Gateway module. And over time, men have been significantly and consistently both more likely to see that module out to the end and to pass it and to get a good pass. That effect isn't there on other modules, and in fact on some of our modules it's reversed, and that finding is actually quite common across the UK physics education sector, that effects vary from module to module. But coming back to this particular example, in fact the effect is quite stark. So what we're looking there is the distribution of different outcomes by pass, that's pass 1, pass 2, pass 3 and pass 4, where pass 1 is distinction, for the entire population of male students, shown in blue, compared with the entire population of female students. As you can see, men are much likely to pass, they're much more likely to get a good pass than women are. There are a number of hypotheses for this sort of effect in assessment, and unfortunately I just haven't got the time to talk about them now. We have investigated the other effects, and it's a bit of a spoiler alert, but I'll say we haven't really found anything that explains the entire effect. And for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to concentrate on things that relate to assessment, that there may be something in our assessment that's actively favouring the male students. Again, when you look at assessment, there's all sorts of possible explanations for what might be causing a gender difference in response. I'm just going to pick out a couple of those. I think the idea of gendered context is quite interesting. That's the idea that maybe the way in which the question is worded, is it given in the context of a particular sport? Is it talking about guns, something like that, that might disadvantage particular groups? I don't think there's actually any hard evidence that supports that, but there is evidence that if somebody can't understand a question, then they can't answer it. So it's something that we need to be aware of. There's a fair few papers that talk about a disadvantage to women in the use of multiple choice questions, and that's what I'm going to be looking at in more detail in a minute. Other ideas are that there may be something in the presentation of the question, the number of words, whether it's got diagrams. There may be something about the length of the test, and it may depend on the amount of scaffolding that you put in. That's the number of hints. Now, we have looked at that as well, and if you're interested, I'd refer you to the paper by Dawkins there. And finally, of course, it may be what the question is assessing. So just homing in on this, whether it's multiple choice questions that are causing a particular male advantage. So here we have men are shown in blue. I'm afraid women are shown in pink. It's not my picture. And this shows an exam, a number of exams, which have part A, multiple choice questions, part B, short answer questions, and part C, longer questions. You can see that the median for men is higher in each three cases, but I hope you'll agree that there's not any significant difference in the gap between men and women for the 3 parts on the exam. That contrasts with this slide, which shows the difference for the different Part C questions. And just to explain, students chose 3 of the 7 questions. And you'll see that, if you can manage to make out the different colours there, that sometimes men do better, sometimes women do better. And that becomes particularly interesting where you see that actually this is the difference in which of the questions men and women choose. And interestingly, question 20 and 21, which are the Newtonian mechanics questions, men are actually more likely to choose than women. Whereas it's actually the other way around for the other questions. So maybe there's something in that. So in an attempt to explore this multiple choice issue, we looked in more detail at our interactive computer mark questions, which refer to as ICMAs. And as I think probably most of you are aware, at the UK Open University, we now use Moodle. We did use OpenMark, and that was the system we were using when a lot of this work was done. However, the principles remain exactly the same, and the fundamental thing is that we're not just talking about multiple choice questions, we're talking about a very wide range of different computer mark question types, including some really quite sophisticated ones. And the whole range of question types was in use on this particular module. There's a total of 56 different ICMA questions represented in that slide, with the numbering along the horizontal axis and the mean score, which was out of 4 for each question, on the vertical axis. And you possibly can make out that the men, again shown in blue, tend to do better, well, more than tend, they do better on most questions, but not absolutely all questions. But most significantly, the amount of the difference and whether it's not significant varies. So just looking at 3 particular questions now. Now these are the 3 questions which, for a really quite large data set, we found that there was a significant male advantage. I'm going to show you the 3 questions. I'm not going to say much about them. I'm just going to show you what they look like. And point out that those 2 questions are both constructed question types, constructed response question types, where people are typing their answer. They're not multiple choice, they're not selected response questions of any type. And the third one that had a male advantage is the one shown on the left, which is a drag and drop question type. That's a thermodynamics question. The other 2 were mechanics. The only significant different thing between those questions that we've been able to identify is that they all have 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional diagrams or graphs, which actually not that many of the questions do. The interesting thing is that the question shown in the right, which actually has a slight female advantage, it's not significant, but it is an effect that's repeated quite a lot for different questions and on different modules, is actually a selected question type. It's a multiple response question, and women do better. So it's interesting. We haven't found that multiple choice effect that others have reported. I would comment that the questions, like the ones on the right there, actually are quite wordy questions. I just want to end by looking at this from a different piece of work, looking at the same thing. And the context for this is the force concept inventory, which some of you will be aware is a very well-known concept inventory used to assess conceptual understanding of Newtonian mechanics. And it's 2 significant points that I'd highlight. The first one is that it conventionally relies on multiple choice questions. And the second thing is that it's pretty well-known fact that men do better on average on it than women do, particularly on some questions. And if you put those 2 things together, you begin to have a piece of evidence that looks really to be quite contrasting to what I've been talking about a few minutes ago. Where we were able to get involved was a PhD student of ours, Mark, has actually developed a free text version of the FCI using Moodle's pattern match question type. And in development, the developmental version had roughly half free text questions where people were typing their answer as a sentence, and half were multiple choice questions. So, was there still a gender difference? Now, this is very early work and we don't have a huge data set, but from what we can see so far, there is still a gender gap, but it's not as big as it is for the purely multiple choice version, and the effect's larger and more significant for the questions that are multiple choice than for those that aren't. So we thought, well, this just doesn't make sense at all. We've got evidence from different places that's saying different things. But then we realised that half of the multiple choice questions had been, one of the reasons why we'd kept multiple choice questions was that they were the questions where people were maybe asked to describe the trajectory that something followed, which is quite difficult to do in free text. So we'd kept them with their diagrams, with their two-dimensional illustrations of a ball being thrown into the air or something like that. And was that maybe the explanation? Was it this diagram thing again? Unfortunately, the early results we've got indicate that that's not the explanation. I'm going to stop with that slide. This is clearly an area that still needs further work. We know that there's a problem, but we don't know what the problem is. We're continuing to work in the area. If you'd like to work with us, please do get in touch. Thank you very much.